The Andromedan Empire tried to wipe out the human race, slaughtering billions without mercy. But they failed, because humans refused to go extinct. The expansionist Andromedan Empire saw the rapidly advancing humans as a future threat. In a devastating surprise attack, they destroyed Earth and obliterated major human colonies across the galaxy. Death tolls were catastrophic. Trillions perished. Commander Mark Russell barely escaped the carnage. This brilliant human tactician fled with a ragtag fleet of survivors, the last remnants of humanity. His desperate mission: ensure human survival at all costs. Outnumbered and outgunned, the odds were impossible, but Mark refused to let humanity fade into oblivion. He led the tattered remains of his species in a guerrilla war, striking from hidden bases. Hit-and-run raids steadily weakened the Andromedan warships. During one daring offensive, Mark's rebel forces stormed an Andromedan supply depot. Explosions lit the night as human raiders overwhelmed the defenses. Amidst the chaos, Mark personally captured Varys, a high-ranking Andromedan commander. Mark's soldiers urged swift execution, but Mark wanted intel on Andromedan vulnerabilities. In exchange for his life, Varys reluctantly provided information. Over time, Varys grew to respect the indomitable human spirit. He revealed the true Andromedan agenda: total human extermination. In their eyes, humans were vermin to be culled. Varys urged Mark to retreat to uncharted space and hide, survive. But Mark refused. "Humans don't run from bullies," he said with iron conviction. Studying star charts, he devised an audacious plan: a direct assault on the Andromedan homeworld. One decisive strike at the heart of the Empire. It was a suicide mission, but it could turn the tide. Mark gathered his best ships and bravest rebels. Using Varys's insider knowledge, the human strike team plotted their infiltration of Andros Prime. The enemy capital was a seemingly impregnable fortress world, but if they could just reach the Andromedan command center, they could cripple the enemy war machine. Everything hinged on this operation. The survival of humanity hung in the balance. Mark had one shot, one chance to save his species. The ragtag fleet of human ships hurtled toward Andros Prime, a tiny rebel force against impossible odds. But despite the grim calculus, human spirits were undaunted. They would face their would-be exterminators and fight to their last breath. For the future of humanity, the Andromedan Empire had to fall. The battle of all battles was about to unfold. Mark's fighter screams through the Andros Prime sky, blasters spitting fire as he leads the spearhead. His strike team follows close, an arrowhead of deadly ships piercing into the heart of the enemy capital. "This is it, people. Give 'em hell!" Mark yells over comms, juking hard to evade the flak bursts peppering his shields. The fighters strafe the palace defenses, drawing fire as the infiltration team's drop pods hurtle groundward like meteors. Slamming down on the shattered ferrocrete, hatches blast open, and Mark charges out with his commandos, pulse rifles blazing. They smash through the inner perimeter in a hail of plasma bolts, Andromedan guards falling before the human onslaught. "Push forward! We're almost there!" Mark urges, storming up the shattered steps. Demolition charges blow open the bunker-like doors, and they're in. The fighting is close and brutal in the warren of corridors. Andromedan blood splashes the walls as Mark's team blasts a path in, taking casualties, but not slowing. Finally, they breach the throne room, where the Andromedan Emperor rises with a snarl, shielded by his elite Praetorian guard. A storm of plasma fire cuts down the guardsmen as the humans close in. Mark's soldiers fall too, buying him a shot at the Emperor with their lives. Seizing his chance, he lunges forward to duel the Andromedan tyrant blade to blade. It's a titanic struggle, but Mark presses his opening and at last cuts down the Emperor with a final savage blow. Not pausing, he leaps to the command console and sends the false orders to disrupt the enemy forces, even as the human hacker's malicious code crashes Andromedan systems planet-wide. The disruption allows the main human fleet to punch through the defenses and rain destruction on critical targets across Andros Prime. Mark's gambit is working. But the Andromedans quickly regroup under the ruthless General Zoltar, who rallies the Imperial fleet to turn on the attackers before they can break free. Mark hastens back to his fighter, lifting off to lead a desperate holding action. All ships focus fire on their command cruisers. Buy our people time to jump clear, he orders, his blasters raking the enemy formations. But the Andromedan counterattack is overwhelming. One by one, Mark's wingmen wink out around him, and finally a plasma blast shears off his own fighter's wing. He prepares to ram the enemy flagship bridge in a final suicide run. Only for Varys to swoop in with guns blazing, extracting Mark an instant before his crippled ship detonates. The unlikely allies punch their way free of the furball and streak for deep space, the battered remnants of the human strike force racing in their wake. The Andros raid has dealt the Andromedan war machine a savage blow, but at a grim price. As the survivors regroup at the fallback point, Mark knows this is only the beginning. The Andromedans will be hunting them now, and won't stop until every last human is dead. The battle for humanity's survival has only just begun. The survivors gathered in the dimly lit command center of their hidden base. Mark stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the haggard faces before him. The losses were staggering. "We've lost over half our fleet," Lieutenant Chen reported, her voice tight. "Fuel reserves are critical. We're down to our last stockpile of weapons." Mark nodded grimly. "And the Andromedans?" "Intel suggests General Zoltar is marshalling a massive armada," Varys interjected. "They're combing the sector for us. It's only a matter of time before they find this base." A heavy silence fell over the room. They all knew the truth. Alone, they stood no chance against the full might of the Andromedan war machine. "We need allies," Mark said finally. He turned to Varys. "You mentioned a potential option earlier. Tell me more." Varys pulled up a star chart on the holo display. "The Corva. Their homeworld is here in the Centaurus arm. They've had disagreements with the Andromedans in the past." "Disagreements?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "The Andromedans attempted to subjugate them a century ago. The Corva drove them off, but at great cost. They've been isolationist ever since." Mark studied the star chart. "What makes you think they'd help us?" "Their strategic location could prove invaluable," Varys explained. "And while their technology is primitive compared to ours, their population is vast. With our knowledge and their numbers—" Mark nodded slowly. "It's worth a shot. Prep a diplomatic shuttle. We leave in an hour." The journey to the Corva homeworld was tense. As they approached the planet, Mark marveled at the dense network of orbital platforms surrounding it. For a primitive species, the Corva were clearly no pushovers. Their shuttle was escorted to a sprawling citadel. Inside, Mark found himself face-to-face with the Corva Leadership Council, a dozen stern-faced aliens with mottled blue skin and 4 arms each. "Why have you come here, human?" the lead counselor demanded. Mark stepped forward, Varys at his side, to translate. "I come seeking an alliance. The Andromedan Empire threatens not just humanity, but all free peoples of the galaxy. If we fall, you will be next." The council erupted in heated debate. Mark waited patiently as Varys relayed their concerns: mistrust of outsiders, fear of Andromedan reprisal, doubts about human intentions. Finally, Mark spoke again. "I understand your hesitation, but together we have a chance to stop the Andromedans once and for all. We offer our technology, our tactical expertise. Help us upgrade your defenses, and together we can ensure the freedom of both our peoples." More debate followed. Hours passed as the negotiations stretched on. Just when it seemed the council would reject the proposal, the lead counselor raised a hand for silence. "We will join your fight, human," he declared, "for the sake of our children's future." The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Human engineers worked alongside Corva technicians, upgrading their ships and weapons. Mark pored over strategic simulations with Corva commanders, devising layered defensive plans. But even as progress was made, new challenges arose. Refugees from human colonies and other worlds conquered by the Andromedans began pouring into the Corva system. Tensions flared as resources grew strained. Mark found himself constantly putting out fires. One moment he was mediating a dispute between human and Corva workers. The next, he was calming panicked civilians as rumors of Andromedan attacks spread. Through it all, Varys remained at his side. The Andromedan defector proved an invaluable advisor, his insight into enemy tactics and technology proving crucial time and again. "You should rest," Varys said one night, finding Mark still at work in the command center. Varys laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've united species that have been at odds for centuries. You've given hope to the hopeless, but you can't lead if you work yourself to death." Mark smiled wryly. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best," Varys replied. Their moment of camaraderie was shattered as alarms blared. A battered scout ship limped into orbit, its hull scored by plasma burns. "Sir," the pilot's panicked voice crackled over the comm. "The Andromedans, they have a new weapon. We saw it destroy an entire planet. General Zoltar is leading the armada here himself. They'll be here in days." Mark's blood ran cold. They weren't ready. The planetary defenses were only half complete. If Zoltar reached the Corva homeworld, it would all be over. He made his decision in an instant. "Prep every combat-capable ship we have. We're going to intercept them." "It's our only chance," Mark replied grimly. "We have to buy time for the planet's defenses to be finished." Word spread quickly. Mark expected only his most loyal troops to volunteer for what was almost certainly a one-way mission. To his surprise, the entire Corva Leadership Council stepped forward, along with scores of human and alien refugees. "You've shown us the meaning of courage," the lead counselor said. "We will stand with you." As the ragtag fleet of human, Corva, and refugee ships assembled, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. They were vastly outgunned and outnumbered, but the fire of defiance burning in the eyes of every crew member told him that they just might have a chance. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump," Mark ordered. "We're taking the fight to Zoltar." The ragtag fleet burst out of hyperspace, a motley assortment of human, Corva, and refugee vessels, facing down the terrifying might of the Andromedan armada. Mark's voice crackled over the comms. Fighters poured from launch bays, streaking towards the looming Andromedan capital ships. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the void. Mark's squadron dove into the fray, juking and rolling to avoid enemy fire. His targeting computer locked onto an Andromedan cruiser. "Fox 3, he called, loosing a spread of missiles that blossomed into fiery destruction along the enemy hull. But the Andromedans gave as good as they got. A swarm of lethal battle drones swept in, their weapons scything through Mark's formation. "Break left," he shouted, but it was too late. 3 of his wingmen vanished in balls of fire. Alarms blared as Mark found himself cut off, hostile craft boxing him in on all sides. His fingers danced over the controls, wringing every ounce of performance from his fighter, but there were too many. His shields buckled under the barrage. Just as Mark braced for the end, a familiar voice rang out, "On your 6, human." Varys's fighter screamed past, guns blazing. A half-dozen Corva ships followed in his wake, their concentrated fire shredding the Andromedan drones. "Cutting it a bit close there," Mark said, allowing himself a grim smile. "Consider us even," Varys replied. But their small victory was short-lived. All around them, the battle turned against the defenders. Mark watched in horror as Andromedan weapons tore through Allied ships seamlessly. "All units fall back," he ordered. "Regroup at Rally Point Omega." Before they could comply, space itself seemed to split open. A monstrous shape emerged from the rift, the Andromedan superweapon. It dwarfed even the largest battleships, a nightmarish construct of alien geometries that hurt the eye to look upon. The Leviathan's weapons spoke, and entire squadrons simply ceased to exist. Nothing in Mark's arsenal even scratched its surface. "Varys, with me," Mark called. "Everyone else retreat, get back to Corva, warn them." The 2 fighters dove towards the behemoth, afterburners screaming. They weaved through energy beams that could shatter planets, unleashing every weapon they had at the monstrosity's core. For a moment, Mark dared to hope as their missiles found their mark. Then the superweapon's counterstrike engulfed them. "Eject, now!" Mark yelled. He yanked the emergency release an instant before his fighter disintegrated. The escape pod tumbled through the chaos of battle, alarms blaring as its systems overloaded. Mark's last glimpse before losing consciousness was of Varys's pod, drifting nearby in the starry void. He awoke to rough hands dragging him from the battered escape pod. Andromedan troops hauled him onto the deck of a vast hangar. Nearby, he saw Varys receiving similar treatment. "Welcome aboard, vermin," a cold voice said. Mark looked up to see General Zoltar himself, flanked by guards. "I hope you enjoyed your heroic last stand. It will make a fine tale for the history books, after we've wiped out your miserable species, of course." Zoltar's laughter echoed as Mark and Varys were dragged away. They found themselves thrown into a makeshift cell, little more than a storage compartment hastily repurposed. His eyes fell on a nearby access panel. A desperate plan began to form. Mark's fingers flew across the alien control panel, sweat beading on his brow as he input commands. Beside him, Varys stood watch, blaster at the ready. "How much longer?" Varys hissed, eyes darting to the sealed door. "Almost there," Mark muttered. "These systems are unlike anything I've seen." A thunderous boom shook the chamber. The Andromedans were trying to force their way in. "Now or never, human," Varys urged. He initiated the sequence. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the superweapon hummed to life, displays flickering with alien script. "We're in," Mark exclaimed. Their victory was short-lived. Alarms blared as the door buckled under sustained fire. "Zoltar knows," Varys growled. The door exploded inward. Mark dove for cover as plasma bolts seared the air. Varys returned fire, dropping 2 Andromedan guards. Outside the viewport, the Corva homeworld loomed large. The Andromedan fleet advanced relentlessly, their weapons tearing through the defenders. Mark's hands trembled as he rerouted power, praying his jury-rigged commands would work. A stray shot grazed his arm, but he barely noticed the pain. "Mark!" Varys called out in warning. He turned to see a fresh wave of Andromedans pouring through the breach. Varys stood his ground, blaster spitting death, but they were running out of time. "It's ready," Mark yelled. "I need 10 more seconds." The Andromedan defector charged forward, tackling the first guards through the door. Mark forced himself to focus on the firing controls, ignoring the sounds of desperate combat behind him. His finger hovered over the final command. In that instant, Mark locked eyes with Varys one last time. No words were needed. The superweapon discharged, a lance of unimaginable energy lashing out across space. It struck Zoltar's flagship dead center, vaporizing the massive vessel in a silent explosion. Andromedan troops froze in shock. Mark seized the moment, slamming his palm on the emergency broadcast panel. "This is Commander Mark to all Allied forces," he rasped. "Zoltar is dead. We've taken control of the superweapon. Transmitting access codes now." He punched in the final sequence, knowing it would be his last act. As the codes streamed out, Mark turned to face the stunned Andromedans. He raised his hands in surrender, but kept his head high. The Corva homeworld glowed blue-green through the viewport. Somehow, against adversity, they'd won. Mark allowed himself a small smile as the Andromedan guards surrounded him. Outside, the tide of battle shifted. Allied ships, reinvigorated by Mark's transmission, surged forward. The superweapon, now under their control, systematically obliterated Andromedan capital ships. Without Zoltar's iron grip, the Andromedan fleet fractured. Some ships tried to flee, others fought on in disorganized pockets, but it was already over. Mark watched the final moments of the battle unfold, even as rough hands seized him. He'd done his part. Now it was up to the survivors to forge a new future from the ashes of war. Mark stood on the bridge of the captured Andromedan superweapon, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Corva homeworld hung suspended in space, a blue-green jewel surrounded by the wreckage of battle. Status report, he barked. A young human officer spoke up. Defensive perimeter established, sir. We've repelled 3 Andromedan counterattacks in the last hour. Mark nodded, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction. But the reprieve was short-lived. Alarms blared as new contacts appeared on the long-range scanners. A massive fleet of Andromedan ships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. "It's Varric," Varys growled, his alien features twisting in disgust. "He's made his move." Before Mark could respond, the first salvo hit. The orbital defense platforms shuddered under the barrage, their shields flaring bright blue as they struggled to absorb the impact. "All ships, battle stations," Mark shouted into the comms. "This is not a drill. Varric is here and he's brought an armada." He turned to his crew. "Prep the doomsday cannon. We're taking that bastard head-on." As Mark's ragtag fleet moved to engage, Varric's ships unleashed a new horror. Sickly green pods rained down on the planet's surface, bursting open to release clouds of virulent mist. "Sir," a Corva technician's voice cracked with panic. "The bioweapons, they're targeting our physiology." Mark watched in horror as reports flooded in. Allied troops collapsed, their bodies ravaged by the engineered pathogens. Civilians screamed as the contagion spread through population centers. "Contain those outbreaks," Mark ordered, his voice hoarse. "Get every medic and scientist we have working on a cure." But even as they fought to stem the tide of death below, the battle in space raged on. Mark's fingers danced across the superweapons controls, targeting Varric's ships with deadly precision. Varric's face appeared on the console, his Andromedan features twisted in a sneer. "Surrender now, human, and I may spare your pathetic allies." Mark forced a smile. "Let's discuss terms. Move your flagship into neutral space and we'll talk." As Varric's massive ship lumbered into position, Varys grabbed Mark's arm. "You can't trust him," he hissed. "This is madness." Mark shook his head. "It's the only way." He keyed in the firing sequence, his hand hovering over the final command. "Now," he roared. The superweapon discharged, a lance of pure energy that split the void. Varric's flagship vanished in a silent explosion, taking the Andromedan leadership with it. For a moment all was still. Then chaos erupted as Varric's subordinates fought for control, their ships turning on each other in a frenzy of fire and destruction. Mark allowed himself a grim smile, but his victory was short-lived. New alarms blared as energy readings spiked across the system. "They've activated the other superweapons," Varys said, his voice tight with fear. "They'll destroy everything." Mark's mind raced. There was only one option left. He turned to his crew, his eyes blazing with persistence. "I need volunteers for a suicide mission," he said. "We're taking the fight to them." Hands shot up across the bridge, human, Corva, and alien alike united in their drive. As Varys coordinated the defensive perimeter around the Corva homeworld, Mark led his strike team into the heart of enemy territory. They fought their way through Varric's mobile superweapon facility, every step bought with blood and courage. Finally, they reached the central reactor core. Mark's fingers flew as he set the demolition charges, sweat beading on his brow. 30 seconds, he shouted. "Everyone out." They ran, plasma bolts searing the air around them. Mark dove through the airlock just as the charges detonated. The explosion ripped through space, consuming the superweapon and the surrounding Andromedan ships in a cascade of antimatter annihilation. When the light faded, Mark looked out at the scarred battlefield. The Andromedan threat was finally truly over, but the cost had been beyond measure. As the survivors gathered, Mark knew their fight was just getting started. They had won the day, but lost so much in the process. There was only one path forward now. "Set course for the galactic frontier," he ordered. "We find a new home, we rebuild, and we make damn sure this never happens again." The ragtag fleet of survivors limped away from the battle-scarred system, carrying the hopes and dreams of multiple species. As they jumped to hyperspace, Mark exchanged a look with Varys. No words were needed. Their real journey was just beginning. The twin suns cast long shadows across the alien landscape as Mark Russell surveyed the excavation site. Sweat dripped from his brow, mingling with the dirt caked on his face. He wiped it away with a grimy hand, eyes fixed on the massive structure looming before him. "We've breached the outer chamber, sir," the young woman replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "Initial scans show energy readings off the charts." He turned to see Varys approaching, the Corva's alien features set in a grim expression. "What is it?" Mark asked, already knowing the answer. Varys gestured to the ruins. "This path you're taking us down, it's dangerous. We've seen what this technology is capable of. The entire planet is a graveyard." Mark's fists tight. "It's our only chance, Varys. You know what's out there, what the Andromedans did to us. We can't let that happen again." "And what if we become the very thing we're trying to protect ourselves against?" Varys countered. "This power, it's too much for any one species to wield." Before Mark could respond, an alarm blared from the excavation site. Both men sprinted towards the commotion, pushing past panicked workers. They reached the entrance to the newly uncovered chamber, just as a blinding light erupted from within. Mark shielded his eyes, feeling the ground shake beneath his feet. When the light faded, he peered into the darkness. Strange symbols pulsed along the walls, emitting an eerie glow. In the center of the room stood a towering obelisk, crackling with energy. "By the stars," Varys breathed. Mark stepped forward, drawn by an inexplicable pull. He reached out, fingers trembling as they neared the surface of the obelisk. "Mark, don't!" Varys shouted. But it was too late. The moment Mark's hand made contact, a surge of energy coursed through his body. Images flooded his mind. Vast fleets of ships, worlds consumed by fire, entire galaxies reshaped at will. He staggered back, gasping for air. Varys caught him before he could fall. Mark looked up, his eyes wild with a mixture of awe and terror. "Everything," he whispered, "the power to reshape reality itself. We can do more than just defend ourselves, Varys. We can remake the universe in our image." Varys recoiled, horror etched across his alien features. "This is madness, Mark. You're talking about playing God." "No," Mark said, his voice hard with conviction. "I'm talking about ensuring our survival, about making sure what happened to Earth never happens again." Varys watched as Mark barked orders to the assembled team, directing them to begin harvesting the ancient technology. The Corva's shoulders slumped, the weight of impending doom settling upon him. As the excavation team swarmed into the chamber, Varys retreated. He knew then that his warnings would fall on deaf ears. The die was cast, and they were hurtling towards a future that filled him with dread. Mark stood before the obelisk, his eyes gleaming with the reflected light of limitless power. The secrets of the Archaelects were within his grasp, and nothing would stop him from claiming them. The years caused great concern on Mark, as he stood before the reinforced blast doors of Varys's cell. The constant hum of the colony's power generators filled the air, a stark reminder of the precarious existence they'd carved out on this alien world. With a deep breath, he pressed his palm to the biometric scanner. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing Varys hunched in the corner. The Corva's once proud posture was bent, his alien features gaunt from confinement. He looked up, eyes narrowing at the sight of his former friend and now jailer. "Come to gloat, Mark." Varys's voice was hoarse from disuse. Mark shook his head, the weight of recent events evident in the lines etched on his face. "We need your help, Varys. It's all gone to hell." Mark's fists clenched. "There's still a chance, but I can't do it alone. Will you help us?" Varys stood slowly, joints creaking. "For the sake of our people, not for you." They exited the cell, the corridor beyond bustling with frantic activity. Alarms blared as another section of the colony fell to the invaders. Mark led Varys to a waiting transport, joined by a team of haggard engineers clutching an array of hastily assembled equipment. The vehicle plunged into the depths of the colony, descending towards the quantum nexus. Through reinforced viewports, they caught glimpses of the horror unfolding above. Writhing tentacles of pure energy lashed out from shimmering rifts, while amorphous beings of impossible geometry phased through solid walls. "My God," one of the engineers whispered, "what have we unleashed?" They reached the nexus, a vast chamber pulsing with otherworldly light. At its center stood a towering obelisk, crackling with barely contained power. The air itself seemed to warp and twist around it. Varys studied the alien controls, his fingers dancing over glyphing symbols. Perhaps, but the power required, it could tear this entire system apart. A distant explosion rocked the chamber. Mark's comm crackled to life, filled with the screams of dying soldiers. Varys nodded grimly and began the complex sequence to initiate a catastrophic overload. As energy levels spiked, the very fabric of reality seemed to buckle around them. The team worked feverishly, rerouting power and struggling to contain the cascading reactions. A piercing shriek filled the air as a rift tore open within the chamber itself. Tendrils of impossible color reached out, grasping for the humans and Corva alike. Mark fired his weapon, the energy bolts seeming to bend as they neared the anomaly. "Almost there," Varys shouted over the cacophony. "But the feedback loop, it's too strong." Mark realized what had to be done. He locked eyes with Varys one final time, a lifetime of friendship and betrayal passing between them in an instant. Then he turned and strode towards the pulsing obelisk. Mark strode towards the pulsing obelisk, his body crackling with otherworldly energy. As he reached out to touch its surface, reality itself seemed to bend and warp around him. In an instant, he felt his consciousness expand beyond the confines of his physical form. Varys's voice echoed in his mind. "Mark, we must act quickly. The dimensional fabric is unraveling." Together, they plunged into the quantum nexus, their merged consciousness navigating the labyrinthine construct of the Archaelect's technology. Exotic particles danced around them, forming intricate patterns that defied conventional physics. As they delved deeper, shadowy tendrils of impossible geometry reached out, grasping at their essence. Mark felt a chill run through his non-corporeal form as he realized these were the invaders from beyond, trying to drag them into the void. "Stay focused," Varys urged. "We must reach the core." They pushed forward, their combined will creating a barrier against the encroaching horrors. Suddenly, a rift opened beside them, and Mark watched in horror as two of his team members were pulled screaming into its maw. Their bodies twisted and stretched, dissolving into abstract patterns of light and color before vanishing completely. "We can't save them," Varys said, his tone heavy with regret. "We must press on." The tunnel before them warped and stretched, leading them into a realm that existed outside of normal space-time. Here, reality itself seemed fluid, with possibilities branching out in every direction. "To proceed, we must abandon our physical forms entirely," Varys explained. "Are you prepared for this, Mark? There's no turning back." Mark hesitated for a moment, the enormity of the decision weighing on him. But the memory of Earth's destruction and the threat still looming over the colony steeled his determination. "Let's do it." They released the last tethers to their mortal shells, becoming pure energy racing along quantum probability waves. Mark felt his sense of self begin to dissolve, his identity becoming a fluid, ever-changing thing. As they hurtled through this formless expanse, Varys suddenly tensed. There's something else here, something wrong. A malevolent presence made itself known, a vast alien intelligence that seemed to permeate the very fabric of this strange realm. It lashed out at them with tendrils of pure entropy, threatening to unravel their very essence. Mark felt the two humans who had followed them falter and fade, their consciousness unable to withstand the onslaught. Soon, only he and Varys remained, their energies intertwined as they fought against the invasive entity. Together, they focused their combined will, drawing upon the limitless energy of the quantum vacuum. Layer by layer, they constructed metaphysical shields, each one more complex than the last. The alien parasite hammered against their defenses, but they held firm. In a final bold strategy, Mark and Varys merged completely, becoming a singular point of infinite density and power. With this newfound strength, they unleashed a wave of gravitational force that shook the very foundations of reality. The parasitic entity screamed in a frequency beyond human comprehension as its hold on the Nexus was shattered. Rifts collapsed, sealing shut and cutting off the invasion at its source. For a brief eternal moment, Mark and Varys existed as one transcendent being. Visions of cosmic power and knowledge beyond imagining flooded their shared consciousness. But the strain was too great, and they felt themselves being pulled back to the physical plane. As their merged form began to unravel, Varys's thoughts brushed against Mark's. Remember, this is only the beginning. Our destinies are now intertwined. Then darkness claimed them both. Mark's eyes snapped open, his consciousness swimming in a sea of fractured realities. Months had passed since the battle within the quantum nexus, yet the price of that cosmic struggle lingered. He sat up in his quarters, head pounding with the echoes of dimensions beyond human comprehension. A monitor beside his bed displayed Varys's vital signs, if they could still be called that. The Corva's body lay motionless in the medical bay, a dim glow pulsing beneath his skin. Mark touched the screen, tracing the erratic patterns of energy that now constituted his friend's existence. "I'm sorry, old friend," he whispered, "but I can't stop now." Mark strode through the colony's corridors, the walls bearing scorch marks from recent struggles. Colonists eyed him warily as he passed, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. He ignored their stares, pushing open the doors to the primary research lab. Inside, a team of haggard scientists huddled around a pulsating archaelect artifact. Dr. Chen, her lab coat stained and torn, looked up as Mark entered. "Any progress?" Mark asked, his voice sharp with impatience. Chen shook her head. "We've tried recalibrating the quantum resonance fields, but—" A sudden tremor shook the lab. Alarms blared as reality itself seemed to ripple. Mark watched in horror as one of the younger researchers screamed, his body stretching and twisting before vanishing into a pinprick of light. "Shit!" Chen yelled, frantically working the controls. "Another localized distortion. We need to shut it down." Mark pushed her aside, his hands flying over the alien interface. The artifact's glow intensified, and for a moment he glimpsed impossible geometries unfolding in the air around them. Then, with a thunderous crack, the distortion collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the heavy breathing of the survivors. Mark turned to Chen, his eyes blazing with a manic intensity. "We're close," he said. "I can feel it. Increase power to the probability channeling array. We need to push harder." "Are necessary," Mark snapped. "You've seen what's out there, what's coming for us. This is our only chance." As if to underscore his point, a distant explosion rocked the colony. Mark's communicator crackled to life. "Sir," a panicked voice shouted, "we've got another incursion in Sector 7, some kind of— Christ, I don't even know how to describe these things." Mark furrowed his eyebrows, issuing rapid-fire orders to contain the latest breach. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in a darkened monitor. For a moment, he barely recognized himself, gaunt, wild-eyed, driven by an obsession that threatened to consume him and everyone around him. But the memory of what he'd glimpsed beyond the veil steeled his purpose. He would see this through at any expense. Humanity's very existence hung in the balance, and Mark would drag them kicking and screaming into a new era of cosmic awareness, even if it meant sacrificing everything he once held dear. As he strode from the lab, the archaelect artifact pulsed behind him, a silent promise of power beyond imagining. And deep in the medical bay, Varys's comatose form twitched, as if sensing the approach of a transcendent destiny that would reshape the very fabric of reality itself. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.